one of the biggest indicators that a boy is going to struggle is if he doesn't have that first positive male role model in his life. And as you say, data is not destiny. It's actually those are the boys that we need to recognise. They're the ones that need the extra help. How can we give them the positive male role models in their life?
Luke Taylor, what a joy to talk to you from the Centre for Social Justice. And we're going to talk about a couple of really interesting things today. Firstly, we'll touch on the I Do report, which came out from CSJ very recently. You can't talk too much about that because it wasn't your report, but we'll just cover it off. And then I want to talk to you about the Lost Boys report, and that is your report. And there's some very crucial information, and it's ongoing, and it's still a big issue. And we don't seem to be addressing it as a society in the way that we should do. And maybe we can touch on a little bit of that today. And finally, we'll end off with a personal note about the fact that you are young yourself and you're married in your early 20s, mid-20s, whatever it is, we'll find out. And we'll touch on why on earth you've done that and bucked the trend. But Luke, first of all, joy to talk to you. Would you like to say hi to our viewers and our listeners?
Hello, very nice to, for you guys to hear me, I suppose. But thanks, Tony, for introing and welcoming me here. It's really nice to be here.
So tell us first, I've written about the I Do report in several places. It raises some pretty stark information out of the ONS recent release. Tell us what it says and why it's so important.
So it's basically looking at the rate and the number of marriages that are happening in the UK, and it's looking at some trend data. So we're kind of comparing now to what it was like in the 1970s, particularly, and basically showing that it has just massively dropped. So from 1970, there were over 400,000 marriages in a year. It's now just over 220,000, so a huge shift there. But actually, kind of the most acute finding there is that within younger people marrying, it's dropped by over 90%. And then when we look at particularly, I think the starkest places for young men, where the rate of marriages between 1970 and 2024 has dropped by over 98%. So if you're a young man, you're under the age of 25 and you're married, you are now in the top 2% of marriages within the UK. And I think what we ended up leading with, the kind of headline, was that now you're more likely to get married if you are a pensioner than if you're a young man.
Quite remarkable, Luke. Quite remarkable. That's where we are. I mean, the policy doesn't deal, or the paper doesn't deal too much with policies to get out of that situation. It's more of a, this is where we are, oh my goodness. And the premise is, of course, that marriage is in fact very important. And I think the prevailing view in the kind of society that forms policy and the media class is that it doesn't really matter whether you're married or not. Now, I know Centre for Social Justice have produced other great papers like Family Structure Still Matters, and all sorts of other great papers that actually prove and argue very strongly with a very elaborate evidence base that yes, in fact, marriage really does still matter. And so, it makes a really big difference. And if you marry younger, it makes a big difference. And maybe we'll come on to that later on. So that's a great piece. If anybody's not read our note on that, if anybody's not read your report, we'll stick the links in. Please go and have a look. Absolutely vital conversation. Another vital conversation relating to that very strongly and more in your area, Luke, is this issue of lost boys. And you've written a report on lost boys and you're still working on the issue. Tell us what that's about and what's going on.
Yes. So my kind of main role at the CSJ is working on our Lost Boys project. So we've been doing that for about a year and a half now. And we're connected to about 900 grassroots charities across the UK, kind of based on that idea that there are a lot of problems that we're facing as a society. But there are people in the communities doing the work day to day that are solving these issues that Westminster just seems to kind of struggle with getting to grips with. But anyway, for the last few years, a lot of those charities have been telling us the same thing, and that is that something was going on with our boys. So we started a year and a half just having a bit of a look into some of the bigger national data sets, and is there actually is there something to this? And we looked at 6 different areas of life. So we went from education to employment rates to family life, health outcomes, crime and criminality, and then the online world. So particularly looking at technology and pornography, and basically found that all in boys were having quite a tough time. So we released our first report on that back in March 2025. And to be honest, it was just a fairly bleak compendium of statistics. Here's how boys are doing in education. Here's how they're doing in employment and all the others. And it to be honest, it went down. I say very well, only in terms of it really picked up within the media, and there was a lot of discussion about it. So just a couple of headliners within the education system. We found that boys are behind all the way from nursery up to university at every stage in between. So SATs, GCSEs, A levels, T levels, and then they get to uni and they're outnumbered about 3-2 now. Likewise, when we started at the beginning, the Prime Minister now has a milestone of he wants 75% of kids to be school ready by the age of 5. And we looked into it, it's currently 67%. So it's a bit of a way to go, but they're on the right trajectory. But if we split for boys and girls are already at 75%. It's boys who are down on 60. So that kind of whole spread within the education system. And then there's obviously other factors to weigh in, particularly looking at issues like poverty and the way that affects the educational outcomes, particularly of those kind of poor working class boys really falling behind in GCSEs, where if you're on free school meals, there is about a third chance that you will get your 4 in English and maths if you're in that situation. So it's incredibly low. And that, then just closes the door to so many other opportunities like apprenticeships or college degrees. So that was just education. There's 5 other sections that I could go into, but I'll let you ask another question.
Yeah, so that's very much an observational tool. It has massive implications. So if you believe the literature that still says actually women want to marry up, if they're outnumbering boys by 3-2 in university, well, there's part of your problem straight away in that case, because the pool for marrying up is suddenly diminished.
Yes, hypergamy is quite a difficult one to, I guess, sometimes speak about, but also slightly wrap your head around. There's some really good data from a Harvard study they did that looked at kind of American college women and their marrying rates, because they basically realized this problem. But hang on, there's basically 3-2 women to men at university, and generally speaking, women they don't date down. Obviously, individual levels might differ, but kind of national data
population level, the stats are very clear.
But so how have the marriage rates for college women stayed the same? And they basically found that college women will marry college men, or they will marry non-college educated men who are earning significantly more than the average non-degree educated man. So the real fallout within that study they found was the marriage rates of non-college women who had a very small kind of share of men that they would like to partner up with. And it didn't mean that they wouldn't kind of form relationships or have families. It just meant that they were a lot less stable because they were much less likely to marry.
Very interesting. And my next question would be, I suppose, has anything changed for boys, or is it the fact that a more egalitarian society has allowed women to excel? So the boys are doing what they always did, arguably, or not, you tell me, but the girls are just doing so much better now.
So to be honest, I don't think there's lots that has changed in the recent years. I think probably the closest change is to do with the online world. And I think that's a really big issue, particularly around algorithms, social media, the kind of living your life online. But some of the other things we looked at, so crime, 96% of the prison population is man. It's kind of always been that way. Likewise, when we look at the issue of fatherlessness, it's a massive issue, and it's definitely worse now than it was, but it's been a really slow burn, quite long change. So if we looked in 1960, if you're sitting your GCSEs as a kid, there's a 90% chance that you'll be living with both your parents. You then go to 1970 and it drops to a 80% chance. As of kids nowadays, if you're sitting your GCSEs, it's about a 50-50 whether or not you'll be living with both of your parents. So it's definitely shifted, but the transition has happened over maybe 60 years or so. So to say it's a really current change is probably not strictly true, because it really depends on what aspect you're looking at.
Wow. And of course that has massive implications on society in every stratosphere of society, massive implications.
Yeah, totally. I mean, it's one of those things where we constantly found that the relationship between, I'm talking about boys here, the relationship between a boy and his father is just incredibly intimate. Not only on an individual level, but also through the data we see it. So I think one of the saddest statistics in the report was that 76% of youth in custody said that they grew up with an absent father. And it was a fairly small sample size. and we can see it repeated across different studies to different percentage degrees, but it was always incredibly high, and it was always very, very intimately linked between the father and the son. And that's not to mention things like the mental health trajectories that we can see within children, not just boys, but that there are a few that actually suggest that while girls are more likely to experience mental health struggles throughout their adolescence, by the age of in their early 20s, actually boys really catch up, especially when they've grown up without a father.
And I mean, let's make the point straight away that this isn't predictive for every individual person. Like you said, I've never met my father, but I've managed my way through, if you like. Obvious issues with all that, but that's a whole entirely separate conversation. But on a population basis, it has a very, very dramatic negative effects and effect on outcomes and results and in all sorts of ways. So you say you've written 2 subsequent papers. What have they covered?
So I can't take credit for one of them, but so we wanted to look at a few different things in the light of the first report. One of the big questions we got, which was, so you've said there's 2.5 million children in the UK who are growing up without their father at home, and those are those kids who will particularly need that kind of positive male role models. So what does it look like to have that male role model? It's a really important aspect to look at, the kind of mentoring. What does it look like to have a good man in your life, especially when your father's not around? One of the things that we found in our polling for our first report was that 2/3 of young women thought that young men nowadays were, quote unquote, pretty frightening. And likewise, we also found that over half of young men thought that the way the media portrayed men was, quote, a bit pathetic. So we thought, hang on, this is really terrible showing for young guys growing up nowadays, where they see masculinity as either a bit pathetic or aggressive and violent. And if that's what's being pushed or showed to them through the media, it's not a very good place to learn how to be a man. So we wanted to look at men within culture. What does pop, what does media, what does TV, radio, music and the arts suggest about masculinity? Has that changed in 20, 25 years? Are boys just more sensitive now, or has there actually been a kind of substantial change in the messaging? So we did kind of some quite qualitative interviews with people high up in the media. We had David Gandy kind of fronting some of our work, who's the most successful male model in history. So it was very interesting. He kind of ignited a conversation around Daddy Pig, whether or not Daddy Pig is a good male role model. Is he just kind of a buffoon who's useless and mummy has to sort everything out? So that was the second report. The most recent one, Boyhood, was laying out some of what we think could be the solutions to this. Very much aware that there's not a silver bullet to this because it's so wide and encompassing, but coming up with some ideas for change, particularly within the early years. So we focused on 3 main areas. We looked at the home, the school, and the screen. Particularly on the home, we were really trying to focus on the role of the father. So what is it like to engage more dads? How can we help dads to be more engaged? And then also, how can we use family hubs as good places to help raise children, help involve fathers within the kind of typically male and mother spaces? And then schools, how can we make schools more boy-friendly? Like we heard earlier, boys are behind before they even start school in the early years, score testing. So what can we do there? Particularly looking at things like making school more active, more sports, maybe outdoor learning, that kind of thing. And then the screen time, basically recognizing that more screen time when you're particularly really young is really holding back a lot of kids. So I think most of the recommendations I would suggest would be really good for both boys and girls, but the express aim of them was how can we really help uplift some of the struggles that boys are facing.
Yeah, I mean, fathers and girls, there's an awful lot of research around that, in terms of the importance of fathers in a girl's life. That's absolutely right. But some of the effects on society are pretty severe when a dad isn't around for a boy. You mentioned the incarceration figures and the strong association with fatherlessness. Dads teach restraint. They teach you when enough is enough. They teach you to control yourself. And if you don't get that, they give you relevance. They give you a purpose in life quite often, which is then replaced by gangs and all sorts of other things like that. It's just written large in society, and you're absolutely right. So in terms of you've mentioned mentoring as going forward. I mean, how do we get traction? So we've got we've got a government at the moment, and dare I say they've all been as bad as each other on this in recent years. But we've got a government at the moment who wants to crack down on misogyny. So you think, okay, so boys are falling behind, boys are having a really hard time. Let's beat up on boys. What are you able to give a response there? I mean, not an official CSJ response, but is that the right thing to do?
I mean, I think it's one of those really, really tricky situations where violence against women and girls has gone up by something like 37% in 5 years. And the government have set them a really good target of halving that in 10 years. And to be fair to them as well, I think to the minister in charge, Alex Davies-Jones, is quite good on this in recognising that they're pushing that boys are victims too. They're very much victims, often before they're perpetrators, but they are also the vast majority perpetrators. And both of those things are true at the same time. I think the challenge comes in where, we found that 41% of sixth form students have been told that boys are a problem for society. Yeah. And if we get kind of third-party organisations coming in and potentially reinforcing that message, it could be, I think, potentially counterproductive. But on the other hand, you can see why there would be certain benefits to doing things like this. I know the government site that I think it's something like 41% of teenage relationships have been, if you are a teenager in a relationship, 41% of them have been abused or victims of abuse. So there's definitely something to be said about how do we encourage better relationship building within schools. I mean, I think the argument more lies in who should be giving that. Should it be teachers? Should it be third-party providers? Should it be parents? And I think there's maybe a more fruitful debate to be had on that. I suspect they needed to do something. I just would be quite cautious as to how they do that, because it could really risk stigmatizing a generation of boys who actually, I think they feel like they're kind of bearing the sins of their fathers almost, because a lot of the stuff that did exist in the past has slightly stigmatized men, but actually it's often not those boys, and all they're receiving is the kind of brunt of it.
And it then almost self-fulfilling prophecy it becomes, which is something we'd really rather avoid in society, I think. So where are you taking this work next? You've mentioned something potentially on mentoring. How is it possible to get traction on this? I mean, we've had, famous footballers standing up and saying, we need more male role models in society. I notice he didn't say, actually, it'd be great if fathers stayed around and looked after their kids and helped raise them, which again is actually fundamentally part of the problem. But where do you take the project from here?
Yeah, so on that father's point, it is difficult to talk about. I think it feels like it can come across as judgmental to talk about the different kind of nature and formation of families within the UK. But I don't think that should stop us talking about it as one of the biggest indicators that a boy is going to struggle is if he doesn't have that first positive male role model in his life. And as you say, data is not destiny. It's actually those are the boys that we need to recognise. They're the ones that need the extra help. How can we give them the positive male role models in their life? I think it's that kind of act local, think national. So we know that's the national picture, but really what it needs to be is just men in the community standing up and being the good guys around. We know that men are less likely to volunteer. So we've spoken to hundreds of charities in the midst of doing this work. And one of the things they constantly struggle with is how to attract good men to volunteer. Off the back of doing this research, particularly on the first report, I did 3 things. One of which you alluded to, we will touch on, which was get married. I was already planning on doing that. But the other 2, the first one I did was went and volunteered at my local youth club, because I thought it's all well and good doing all this stuff and reading about how important it is to have people involved in kids' lives. But if I'm not going out and doing something, and the other was I got a flip phone for myself, because I was spending too much time online and all the stuff that was coming alongside that. So I think I'd really actually implore men, if they're listening, to take an active role in their community in some degree. Can you go and volunteer at the youth club? Can you be an active presence in your local community or church or school? One of the things we struggle with because was what to do about the share of teachers who are men.
Yeah, massive.
Yeah.
Junior schools especially.
Totally. So in secondary schools, a third of teachers are men. primary schools it's 15%, and early year settings it's about 2 or 3. So there's something like a third of primary schools don't have a male teacher in them. So the question is, what do we do about that? And I think the obvious and easy solution would be to say quotas. I think we were hesitant to push quotas on the workforce, but I do think there is definitely something to be said about schools and local areas thinking creatively about how they can encourage and bring more men into the community to be visible to the young people. I think teachers is probably the most obvious point, which is why people go for it. But it can be things like janitors and cooks and sports coaches and just local leaders to come in and do careers workshops. Because it's, again, not to come back to the kind of fatherless boys, but it's those boys who don't have that example of what it means to be a man in your community or a man in relationship to colleagues and other, young people around you, or men and women, that kind of modeling that they really need to see. If there aren't men around for them to see that, then it's going to be really challenging for them to envisage themselves there.
That's right. And then there's a whole concept of we don't really talk much about the benefit of non-toxic masculinity, of good manliness. The idea of being seeking to be a hero, seeking to do the right thing, seeking to sacrifice yourself for the good of others around you, and using your strength for the right purposes, and all those sorts of things which, of old, our freedoms to have these discussions were built on the fact that so many men went out and sacrificed, and everything around us constructionally mostly is built, vast majority, by men. The value and the importance of men, I think, again, we need to talk about that in such a way that it doesn't say men are more important than women or anything like that, but actually helps men to be encouraged to be the best version of a man that they can be, because it's great for society and it's great for the man as well. You feel significant, you feel relevant, you feel you're doing something. People around you say thank you and look up to you for what you're doing. Every man wants that.
Yeah, totally. I think we've almost got to the stage. I do think we've passed it, fortunately, but we almost got to the stage where we talked about toxic masculinity so much we were at risk of making masculinity itself sound toxic. And I think maybe that goes slightly to your question earlier about what we're teaching young boys in schools. But I also think, I know there's a commentator called Scott Galloway who speaks quite well in this regard and actually says, don't believe in toxic masculinity, because if you're displaying those traits that we think are toxic, you're not being a man. To be a man is to be of service, is to create, is to build, is to, protect and love and admire. And I also think it does come down to, and it's a tricky challenge for society, how we display relationships between men and women to younger people. And I think it's one of the most challenging things that we see within the manosphere, or when people talk about the manosphere, it's quite a vague term. I guess it's kind of male influencers online who are potentially on the right.
Yeah, we know who they are. Yeah.
Well, you think of Andrew Tate, in some ways, I think he's a very helpful figure because he tells us what toxic masculinity is. And the challenge is we've basically got the devil, but we haven't got the Messiah, because no one's willing to say, that's a good man, that's what people should aspire to be. But they can say, don't do that. And it's quite a hard cultural script for boys to follow, because they'll be saying, well, I shouldn't be that. Well, then what should I be? And we don't have the same kind of figure.
Telling me, yeah. And that goes back to your, the family hubs you mentioned. Well, we used to have family hubs. They were called churches, and people kind of grew up in a community that pointed you in the right direction, if you like. And the people around you hopefully pointed you in the right direction too. And if you weren't getting that from home, you'd get it from other sources. But again, we've in a lot of parts of our culture, we've lost that. And those kind of guardrails which were put in place by the church, and a lot of our supporters will be Christians, Coalition for Marriage. We've got a lot who aren't and who come from other faiths, but there's that there, which is significant, and I think there's quite a gap because that infrastructure will call you to be better and to do better, and will look down when you don't, and we've kind of lost that notion in society, really.
Yeah, I think it's one of those interesting things that particularly faith institutions, but I don't think it's just those kinds of institutions, because there have been those male spaces where men have always been more likely to congregate, and all the spaces you could kind of think of have been declining for the last 50 years. So you think of pubs, sports clubs, unions, churches, as you say. All of those places where I think there are a few things that would happen in them, but they've all gone. You'd find not only a space that is kind of coded male in some ways, that's helpful for that formation, both spiritual but moral and cultural as well. But also it's a place of intergenerational friendship and mentoring, where you are mentored by someone above you, but you also may mentor those who are coming up below, and you recognize the hierarchy and the change. You fit within a wider social structure. But also I think there's something, and I think the church and religious institutions are particularly good at this, is the rites of passage that it allows. And we've now got to a stage where it's really difficult to say when a boy is a man. We know, the average age of leaving the home for a boy nowadays is 25, which is crazy in my mind. It's 3 years later than for girls. So for girls, I think it's 22, although it might be 23. And actually, it almost feels like this perpetual adolescence, because we expect that boys become men, but really they don't. They're kind of shaped into them. And it always used to be, within having a little bit of a look at what initiations always used to include, there would be a taking of the boy from generally the feminine environment, normally the mother. Yep. They would challenge them, put them through some risk or some danger or some form of struggle. And then they would welcome them after the struggle into the community of men, recognizing that they are no longer what they were. So you are no longer a boy. You are now a man. You are part of this society that we are in. And as such, you have duties to that society. And I think it's difficult to find a place in society nowadays, particularly in the UK, where we see those kinds of structures around, I guess, human, spiritual, moral formation, where you go from that kind of first place into the struggle or the adversity, and then out into that community, particularly being seen by the men in your community. Because, like I've said, it's quite hard in many areas of the UK to actually find those men in society.
And let's not, nobody wants to, turn into Sparta, right? But equally, we've got a wonderfully egalitarian society. There's that word again, where you've got many more women in leadership and in roles of influence in society. But with that, and this you don't have to comment on this because it might be too much hot water for you. But of course, we understand that on a population level, women are much more agreeable than men. Just look at the prison stats, right? And so as you get more women in leadership roles and in roles of influence, you find that that society becomes more feminine generally. And the idea was that would be a great thing. But actually, I'm not sure we're ending up accepting things we would never have accepted in society 20 years ago, things that were very well recognized as objective truths are now subjective realities, and it's really up to you how you think and feel. And all of that comes from the whole feeling based and the not wanting to offend and that sort of stuff. No one's saying that we should, fewer women should be working or in leadership positions or anything else like that. But again, I think it's part of the overall feminization of society, and men are feeling really bad about being men and about being strong and about stepping up in case they offend somebody, even opening doors. I know so many people who say, "Oh, I didn't open a door to a woman in case, I get reported to HR." What on earth has gone on, Luke?
It's chauvinism, not chivalry anymore. But So I don't think it has to be necessarily about the leaders for that final stage. For example, one of the charities we work with, this brilliant organisation down in Clacton area, they're called Lads Need Dads, and one of the things they often find with their boys, so they work with fatherless boys from kind of maybe 10 or 11 up to 18. So they walk with them for a long time, and they provide kind of male mentorship, spaces to be boys, opportunities to go out for the weekend and do adventure things, supporting schools, that kind of thing. But they often find that the boys really struggle to get things like work experience or get from place A to place B, because one boy I can think of really wanted to have an apprenticeship working in plumbing, but didn't know anyone. And actually they asked around and realised that the way that lads around his age and in his place would get into that apprenticeship would be through their dad or through their dad's mates. But this guy obviously didn't have that network of relationships because he didn't have his dad around. As an aside, the charity are great. They managed to basically put a call out on social media, and a couple of local guys came in and just gave the boy an apprenticeship through their local work. But it really highlights that fact that if you don't have your dad, or the kind of a man looking out for you in the community, it really, I think it closes some of the doors, and it brings in your horizons almost, because they can't open it up for you. I mean, as a child, you don't have those social networks. You often rely on your parents or the people looking after you to open them up and use their kind of contact. But who are your sports coaches that we ferry you to every week? Who are your teachers that invest in you? Who are our family friends or your godparents or things like that? And those can be the men in the community that can welcome you in off the back of that initiation. So I don't think it has to be leaders, but it has to. There is something about being a man welcoming you as a boy to becoming a man.
Yeah, very, very relevant, very valid. And you're a bit of a superstar, if you don't mind my saying, Luke. I mean, the fact that you're doing what you're doing at such a young age, and the fact that you got married at such a young age. I mean, you didn't mean to. Oops.
Not sure if it makes me a superstar.
Tripped over and found myself
maybe
at the altar.
My wife.
Because tell us about that then. I mean, what great that you are, but you're part of the 2% in many respects. It looks like, Luke.
Yeah, I mean, I've been going out with my then girlfriend / fiance for about 4 years. I mean, I think I spoke to her about this, and obviously we got married because we were in love. But I think what's different is most people who get married are in love, I'd hope or imagine. I think what might be different is what we often call the kind of capstone or cornerstone argument, and I'm sure you're familiar with this. But the majority of people nowadays, I suspect, view marriage more as a capstone, or we're at least transitioning towards it. So once I've sorted out my career, maybe once I've had kids, or at least I've bought my house, then I will have the wedding and we can get married and be husband and wife. But actually, I think, so myself and my wife wanted it more of that cornerstone. So actually, we're not going to do those things together until we've got ourselves sorted, until this relationship is secure and we love each other, but we've also committed to that in front of our friends, our family. That's what we wanted to do first. And then we can, build from the security of that relationship, career, a family, get a home maybe one day.
It makes logical sense. I mean, rent is halved. All sorts of bills are shared and halved. And you think, well, it just makes sense to get married earlier. And the idea that if you, and of course, marriage gives you the security that that cohabitation doesn't, that you've promised to a group of people that you're going to stick together and that you've made a decision for each other, which is great. But then also, you've got each other's backs. The idea that when one's down, the other one can help, and vice versa. I mean, I did it. It was wonderful. One of my daughters so far has done it. It makes logical sense that why would you leave it till later in life? Why wouldn't you find this co-conspirator to work through life's difficulties together with? And
I like the idea of a co-conspirator.
Yeah. It's great, and you've got each other's backs, and you help each other. And then there's the whole. And I know part of the problem we've got in society these days is that we've convinced ourselves there's no difference between male and female, and bits around the middle, maybe there isn't in certain situations, but actually at the extremes, of course, there is. And generally speaking, you will find, as I find, as most men find, that their wives change them and they change their wives, because you've got those different personalities working on making each other the best version of themselves they can be. And that's just a glorious thing. And all the stats talk about, marriage and family makes a man behave himself, makes a man work harder, curbs his excesses, all those sorts of things, which is great for society. So why more people aren't doing it? It's kind of like, I'm not sure. It doesn't compute. But then the other thing, I suppose, is finding the right person these days. I mean, everyone's so much time online and on screens, they don't get to meet each other personally, and that's a real challenge.
Oh, I mean, it's very tricky. And obviously, because we're young, most of our friends are not married, and actually lots of them aren't in relationships either. So it's definitely a very personal but a current conversation we're having with lots of our friends around who your future husband or wife might be. And I mean, you're preaching to the choir on that stuff. It's one of those funny things. We've only been married for 8 or 9 months now, and yet I've noticed I now unpack straight away when I get home from holiday, which is something I definitely never would have done before. Normally leave it for a few days. But actually, it's the kind of thing that she'll go and do it straight away and won't relax until it is done. And now I've realised subconsciously I'm pretty similar.
And don't, I mean, you've got some battles ahead of you, right, as a couple, and it's going to go up and it's going to go down. But the wonderful thing is, I can say after 30 years, our marriage is better than it's ever been in every single way. And it's like your soulmate is not somebody you meet in a bar one night. It's somebody you've been through life struggles with for 30 years, and there's nothing better than that. Absolutely nothing better than that. Someone who's always got your back, someone who trusts you and will keep your confidence, and vice versa, and knows you for the blooming monster you are, and yet still loves you. There's nothing like that. Absolutely nothing like that, which is marvelous. And how we get more young people. It's funny because I think and I know there's kind of so many economic drivers and taxation drivers, all sorts of other things, but one of the key drivers is what's happening around you. Right. So when my daughter got married, she was 21 or 22. I should know that. Something like that. 21 it might have been. And her husband was a year older. There was about a large number, 100 or more other young people coming to the wedding. And so many of them were either married or getting married, engaged, or hoping to be married themselves, because the culture of those people around them were doing it. And that's one of the key things. When was the last time you saw a baby in the supermarket? Or when was the last time, we saw young people getting married on TV or something? It's just not there in the culture. And we all like sheep have gone astray, right? And largely culturally, we're sheep. We follow what the people around us are doing. So you're great effort. Good man. You're changing that culture. So well done.
Yeah, no, I mean, I do think it's one of those issues where marriage has, you talk about economic levers potentially being underfunded, but I actually think the wider issue is the kind of, again, like you're saying, the social issue where it's actually been underfunded, partly through people modelling it themselves, but also through the way we talk about it and the kind of benefits that it brings.
Luke, you're a superstar. It's really good to speak to you. I'm sure we'll be in touch again, because I'm sure you're going to go from strength to strength on all this, these reports and everything else you're doing for CSJ and whatever might come after that. But Luke Taylor, thank you so much for your time.
No worries. Thanks for having me.